All right. Welcome to tonight's program. I'm Brett Barker, Assistant Professor of History. After the program in the terrace room, which is just out the door to the right. I'd also like to point out that the next program in the Wisconsin Institute of Public Policy and Service program will be the Forum on Afghanistan next Thursday, October 25th at 7 p.m. Finally, you've been given a fair number of pieces of paper tonight, and when you're through with those, you can deposit them on a table in the back of the room, and we'll make sure they get sorted and sent to the proper place. And so before we begin, I present the speakers, at dinner I told them that one of my first introductions to Wisconsin English, when I came here to go to graduate school at Madison, very early on, I was on campus one day, and it was a hot summer day. I was walking by a building on campus, and a jogger stopped me and pointed to the building and said, "Is there a bubbler in there?" I'm an Ohio boy. I don't know things like that. So I looked at him and I tried to be diplomatic, and I said, "Well, there certainly might be." Figuring I couldn't possibly offend anyone. And I did work out that he meant what I would have called a water fountain, but that is the beauty of regional English and of Wisconsin English. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce tonight's panel. With us is Tom Purnell. He is Assistant Professor of Linguistics at the UW-Madison. Also, there is Luanne von Schneidemesser, who is Senior Editor of the Dictionary of American Regional English at Madison. Also with us is Eric Raimy. He's Assistant Professor of English at UW-Madison. And finally, Erica Benson, who is Assistant Professor of English at UW-Eau Claire. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panel here this evening.
Thank you, Brett. We just want to do a quick introduction, then we'll get right into the talks. Sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me now? Is that okay? Okay. I want to thank everyone who invited us here, for Brett for his introduction, also for Ann Herter-Rupp, and for Gene Greenwood and the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service for bringing us here. One of the things about our talks that we really like to do in our talks is trying to make this more of a conversation. So we are going to stand up here and blather for a little bit, but at the end we're going to have questions. And one of the things that we found is that many of the people in the seats know a lot more than we do. And part of the whole goal of our whole project has been to try to find out more just from people that are here, people who are giving us information. There's a lot of things that we think go on, sort of down in Madison, what goes on, or in Eau Claire. And sometimes it doesn't meet with what actually happens or from people's own history over time. And so what we want to do is try to get some engagement with the audience as far as that goes. So we're going to kind of run through our little talks. Feel free to save your questions to the end, and then we'll be really happy to hear what you have to say. Now, one of the things about Wisconsin English is that we've developed over time, one of the major or central aspects of Wisconsin English has been the fact that the whole thing that we think of as Wisconsin English is really part of a larger picture. It's part of a larger picture of what happens in the United States. And Wisconsin is situated very nicely among a number of different dialect movements that are happening right now in the United States. So it really highlights a lot of things about active language change and also about historical change. And those are some of the themes we're going to see. The other theme that we've thought about a lot is how a number of the things that we think of as Wisconsin English are things that have come from different groups and sort of coalesced at one point in time. So you're going to hear that over and over again as we go through words, as we go through sounds and syntax and perception of sounds. Actually, I should click ahead a little bit. First of all, these are the people that are all involved. Many of us are here. But we're going to cover the words of Wisconsin English, the sounds, the grammar, the perception, and trying to show you the things that we've learned about how Wisconsin English has come together, things that have come up from the bottom in a very, very interesting way, and I think a lot of people have responded well to that in terms of thinking about their own past and their own development of their own dialect. So with further ado, I'm going to introduce Luanne von Schneidemesser, and she's going to do the words.
As he mentioned, I'm a senior editor for the Dictionary of American Regional English, which is being written right now in Madison. I mentioned this up front because you'll be seeing bits and pieces of our project during the talk. The one question we're actually asked the most is, what do you call the carbonated beverage that's sweet? And I have seen people in Madison almost get into fights about what this is called in Wisconsin. Well, as you can see from the map here, the people in the eastern part of the state tend to say soda, and the rest of you tend to say pop. So there it is in living color. To getting on to some things that might be more Wisconsin. When I first moved to Madison, I'd spent a year in Germany and a year in Switzerland, and I thought that I knew German. And I walked down the State Street in Madison, and I see this thing called the Brat House, and I was wondering, why do they have a house for nasty little kids? Because I'd never seen it shortened like that to Brat. This was, at that time, really only known in Wisconsin. This is one of the editors for the Dictionary of American Regional English. He's a very good editor. Behind him is, those are our questionnaires that we did between 1965 and 70. We're still working on that material. We also read newspapers, novels, diaries, everything as the other part of our database, and we're combining these two to make our dictionary. But this is a t-shirt put out by the Wisconsin Historical Society. If you go online to their site, you can actually purchase it. And as you can see from the back of it, fountains are where you throw coins, okay? And our definition from the Dictionary of American Regional English of bubbler is on there. And this is in the Wisconsin Historical Society series, Real Wisconsin. The word bubbler actually came from Kohler. Kohler called this thing a bubbler. And as you can see in this dialect survey, it's not only used in part of Wisconsin, note not all of Wisconsin, but it's also used around Rhode Island. This was the marketing area of Kohler in about 1918. This is the area that bubbler has spread to. So I think most Wisconsinites know it, but I don't think most of them use it. Cheesehead, you all know Cheesehead, right? We put it in Dare as a stupid, awkward person. That's from 1919 onward. But today, we have a lot of meanings. The Cheesehead might be the triangular foam piece that you wear on your head. It might be a Packer fan. It might be someone from Wisconsin. I think Illinoisans actually started it as a derogatory term, but Wisconsinites can laugh at themselves, so we've kind of picked it up and run with it. And this is not to say that this is a word that's known only in Wisconsin, used only by Wisconsin. If you remember back in 1995, there was a plane crash, and somebody had the triangular foam Cheesehead, put it on his head, and it saved his life. After that, there was a run on Cheesehead. Lots of people bought those. Okay, this is from a Manitowoc group called the Happy Schnapps Combo. You can get this on CD if you're interested. But it does tell a lot of the words and other features of Wisconsin English that we'll be talking about. For example, it says, come here once, why don't you come by here? And if you look at the last one, it's more Wisconsin than the tamale. But we'll have a brat and kraut and then a couple two-tray beer. Or you can go there by that bubbler, but don't you budge in line. She's a nice day out, ain't so. Budge in line. How many of you say budge in line? Or maybe I put them in the wrong order. Back arrow? Nope, I put them in the wrong order. I told her, she came home and she said, Mom, somebody budged in line. And I'm going, no, Erica, you can budge over on a pew or something like that, but you can't say that. You have to say cut in line or butt in line. And I walked her to school the next morning, and here's this kid comes running up where they line up to go in school, and he tries to butt in line, and the kid says, no budging. So linguists certainly don't know everything. In fact, in Madison, you can also back budge. And I don't know what the purpose of that is, but in any case, there's my budge. So we'll be talking about some of the terms used in Wisconsin. I don't have a lot of time to talk about a lot of them, but some of them, you know things like yeah, hey, and maybe you know booyah. By the way, this questionnaire you have, some of these terms are terms that are probably only used in part of Wisconsin, and probably you won't know them. Some of them, in fact, we haven't found very many people at all who know them. So don't feel like, oh gosh, I've got to know these. This is a test. It's not a test. Anyway, golden birthday started out being a Wisconsin term. How many of you know the term golden birthday? Yes. Okay, good. It's actually spread a little bit. It's now used in like eastern Iowa and Minnesota, a little bit in Illinois. So it's not just Wisconsin anymore. And as you can tell, with Hallmark card coming up with a golden birthday card, it's definitely not just a regional term anymore. Fish boil, you all know the Door County fish boil. But did you know that they also serve lawyers in the restaurant there on Washington Island? This was something I took out of a tourist brochure from Door County. But a lawyer is a type of fish, which might be a burbo or it might be a burbot. They tend to disagree in Door County, or an eel pout. And most people consider it to be a trash fish. But they do use it on this restaurant in Washington Island. We have it in our dictionary, and we call it its region, especially Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The first citation we have in the dictionary is from 1857. It's actually from New York. But if I can read it, maybe you'll understand why it's called that. We call it in these parts a lawyer. A liar, said I. Why, pray? I don't know, unless it's because he ain't of much use and is the slipperiest fish that swims. Okay, as Tom mentioned too, what we say, and this you can probably see on the questionnaire, depends on where we live and depends on what countries our forefathers came from. Here in Marathon County, if I'm correct, more than half of you have German heritage, and a good portion of you have Polish heritage, right? You can see here, for example, in, Washington Island itself has the only Icelandic settlement in Wisconsin. And of course, up around Green Bay, they have a lot of Belgians. There's Finns up in the far north by Ashland, Superior. So we can tell things like that. Wisconsin is the home to the 6th largest population of German ancestry, and here are a few of the words that come into our language from German. Now, those aren't necessarily all Wisconsin terms, although some German terms are only for certain parts of the country. Here are the DARE maps. Now, DARE did 1,002 questionnaires. Remember those things standing behind the editor with the bubbler shirt? Those were our questionnaires. There's over 1,600 questions. We did 1,002 of them, and each questionnaire has one dot on our funny-looking map. We did it by population and settlement history, and they were carried out between 1965 and 70. So here's a comparison of the two. And you can note that we've got Lake Michigan in there. It doesn't have any people in it, but Wisconsin's just to the left of it. Here, for example, is the term Gesundheit, a good German word, which I studied German for 2 years before I realized that Gesundheit doesn't mean God bless you, it means health. God bless you and bless you we wouldn't have in our dictionary because they're regional. They're not regional, they're said all over the country. Gesundheit, as you can see, is regional, so we put it in. They don't use it much in the South. Here's one that is very Wisconsin. Sheepshead and Schafskopf. In fact, We have Schafskopf going back to 1896, and most of the hits are from Wisconsin. In an article entitled "Milwaukee Looks Back on Its Legacy as the Deutsche Athens" from 1997, it says, "Milwaukee is different from most American cities. Where else do thousands of residents play a card game called Schafskopf? Where else would they order a schneck, a sweet roll, with their morning coffee? And what other American phone book boasts 38 pages of names beginning with SCH, from Schab down to Schwolst? Milwaukee actually has more Schmidts in all variations of that name than it has Smiths." So you can see the German heritage in our state is very strong. There's even a website called sheepshead.org, and that started in Milwaukee. And it's gone so far as that they also have a website for wandering sheep, and those are people who no longer live in Wisconsin and play Sheepshead. There was an article written in one of the student papers in Madison, and one of the comments about Sheepshead being unique to Wisconsin, one of the comments that came back from that was, "I very well may have been able to graduate in less than 6 years if not for all the sheeps I played in the rat being the Ratskeller, the student union." Okay, Wisconsin has the 7th largest population of Polish ancestry, and as you can see there, Marathon County is right in the middle of a large segment of that. A few of the Polish words. The last word in the first volume of Dare is Czarnina, which is said especially in Polish areas and especially in Wisconsin. That's also called duck's blood soup or duck blood soup. Sounds not so great to me, but maybe you like it. And there are some of the other terms which I would be better off not pronouncing because I pronounce them incorrectly. You probably know that in Wisconsin we buy bakery. We could buy bakery in a bakery, but we buy a bakery. Some of these people have had to learn that since they've moved here. I had to learn that. I didn't know it. My daughter went to school in Tacoma, Washington to undergrad, and she said, "Let's go buy some bakery," and everyone thought she was strange, and she actually called me up and said, "Mom, these people don't know what I'm talking about." This is another one that's pretty typical, not just actually of Wisconsin, but areas around it. We park in a ramp. We don't park in a garage or a whatever else. We park in a ramp. We don't use parking structure, which is used more in the west. We don't use parking deck, which is more used in the southeast. We use parking ramp, and that's usually upper Midwest, especially Minnesota and Wisconsin. So I could go on for a long time talking about this, but I think I need to stop. One of the questions we're asked a lot is the language homogenized? Well, I think just this small sample will give you an idea that no, it's not homogenized. In fact, I was talking to Brad at dinner, and I was telling him he's from Ohio, but he doesn't know this term. There's a triangle between Cleveland, Akron, and Youngstown, where they say for the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street, a devil strip. Now, that's the only place in the country it's used. We asked that question in their questionnaires, and from Wisconsin, we got 7 different responses from 20-some informants. In Madison, we have to put our trash on the terrace. That was a new term for me when I moved to Madison. Some of you probably put your trash rake your leaves. You can't put them in the street, right? You rake your leaves onto the boulevard, tree lawn, parking, tree bank. There are a lot of terms like this, and a lot of these are not going to change that much. If you look at the websites for the cities like Cleveland and such, you'll find that they actually do say, place your things on the devil strip. These things, I think, are not going to change. We might be changing a lot of our language, but some of these will never change. Thank you.
Thank you, Luanne. I'm going to now switch over and talk about the sounds of Wisconsin. And one of the things about Wisconsin, we sort of have a stereotype. And so the Berrymans have, Lou and Peter have this song that they let us play here. And I'm going to see if this works. Try to get this over. down. Yeah. Is it coming out? Well, actually, if it's not coming out, that's okay. You can see from the words, this is very typical. So it's dem deer, dare here, den dare, dare, here, dare everywhere. And the thing about this song, I mean, it sort of plays on this stereotype about Wisconsin. And actually, one of the questions we want to ask you is what your impression is of these particular sounds, the D, the TH sounds in them, in their, meaning people, or there, over there. And those TH sounds often show up as D. Now this shows up, this is actually fairly common around in many languages, not just in English, but in many places in the United States. And some of those things come from languages that were immigrant languages, so like German, and you hear a lot of, if your grandparents or people that you know are from Germany, you often hear the substitution of the TH by the D sounds. And so it's very typical. What's very interesting though, the thing that we'd like to focus on is what's the relationship between those sounds, which we might say, well, that's just something that the German ancestry brings out. But oftentimes we put a social value on somebody who uses something like this. Either we say, well, that's someone from the past, or we might even say that's somebody who is a working class resident of our state, or it might be someone who's when we went to Eau Claire, I think somebody said these are hunters that are saying this, right? And so there's different values that we put on, and that's what's interesting about language. That language is not just about something that's in a book or something. It's something that we use, and it's also something that we use to convey something about ourselves and about who we are, and for us to interpret who somebody else is. So there's a lot of sounds in Wisconsin that are like this. There are also sounds, getting back to the historical aspect of sounds, there are a number of sounds, things that perhaps we don't even realize we're doing. One of the first studies that Joe Salmons, who's not here tonight, he's in the German department in Madison, he and I got together and we started looking at how Wisconsin speakers might use the S in the final end of a word. So for instance, you might say cars, right? And we have a Z-type sound, or shoes with a Z-type sound in sort of standard English. But we noticed that many people in Wisconsin were producing this a lot like we'll see in German, that they would produce it like cars or shoes, right? And so there's this thing in Saturday Night Live about the Bears and the Bulls. And we've also heard other instances here that we've listed a couple of these. I'm going to wash my hairs. And that's sort of, if you want to sort of stereotype Milwaukee in that case. Another one was one that Joe heard when he was, or he hears actually quite a bit when he plays hockey, is after they play pond hockey, they hear, hey, let's go have some beers. And it seems like when the people say it, they're generally doing that to affect some kind of Wisconsin. Now what's interesting for us about that is that why would somebody, it's sort of like a comedian, why would a comedian use certain things if they didn't have some kind of status already? In other words, we know the only way the joke would work is if we knew that people were already using that particular sound in the language and that it really had some kind of significance. So what we did was we looked at a number of speakers in the Watertown area. We recorded some speakers who were in their 60s and 70s. We compared them to speakers in the same age group that were not in Wisconsin, so from Oregon, California, New Jersey, and we even included a Southerner, although we had to throw that Southerner speaker out. It was my father-in-law, so it's okay to throw him out because he was very different in other ways. But in the comparison of the non-Wisconsinites versus the Wisconsinites, we found that a number of the speakers were producing this type of pronunciation for the Bears, and that people were perceiving them. And when people were, if we took that word out of context and played them to people, they were actually hearing the S type of sound. So you have, for instance, you might have bat and bad, where we have the T and the D in terms of some kind of relationship, and they tell us that they're different words. We find that people are actually producing them with the same kind of ending as you would find, say, in German. So in English we have his and his, and we have bad and bat, and so on and so forth. And in German there's, in terms of the writing you have B-A-D, but it's actually pronounced as bat and rot. so on and so forth, where the final ending, the D, turns into a T. And we noticed that a number of speakers were doing this. And two things we observed. One thing we noticed was that younger speakers were also doing this as well in very interesting ways. It was almost as if they had taken something, they weren't producing it exactly how the older speakers who were actually influenced by German, in other words, we could tie, the reason we chose Watertown was because this sort of like a very core central area for German immigration, starting in the kindergarten, so on and so forth. And so we chose that for a very particular reason, and we found that younger speakers, not only in that area, but Wisconsin speakers outside of the Watertown area, but still in the southeastern part of Wisconsin, were also doing the same thing in a very subtle way. And it seemed as if they were adopting some things from their grandparents, saying, hey, I'm a Wisconsinite, I'm from the southeastern part of the state, and that this is a sign of how they are identifying with this region. So that there's a tying to the history, tying to the region. The other thing we found, and this goes back to sort of an idea that we have, is that it wasn't just the Germans who were talking this way, say the German grandparents that were influencing their children and grandchildren and so on and so forth. But what you have is in Polish, in other Scandinavian languages, where you actually have, say, only S but not a Z, and then in certain dialects of Yiddish, also in Dutch, you have the same process going on. Now, if you have the settlement area that's settled by a number of groups that are very similar in this, a Dutch child playing with, so a child whose relatives are Dutch and he hears sort of Dutchified English in that sort of Dutch sense, not in German sense. And then you have the German child or child of an immigrant who's hearing the same type of thing over in his household, and then you have a child with Polish background and they're hearing the same thing, so on and so forth. But they're all going to school and playing together. Then lo and behold, what are they, like to them it's no different, right? I mean, that's part of their English, right? And so part of it was coming together. And it's, our analogy that we use is polka. It's a lot like polka. When immigrants came to the United States, they brought their musical forms with them, and lo and behold, a lot of them shared very similar features of polka. And so when you put it all together, you've got someone who's German and hears polka, and it sounds a lot like what he's used to, although it's played by a Pole or by someone from one of the other countries that had polka that were coming. So it sort of came together as sort of a regional distinction, and that's a lot what we see with this particular sound set. There's another thing that's happening, and one of the reasons that I'm very interested in Wisconsin is that there are different moves in modern English, moves in terms of how sounds are pronounced. Luanne mentioned that some evidence that language is not becoming homogenized. And one of the things we find about Wisconsin is that there's one particular change coming from the west, from Minneapolis, so we can blame the Minnesotans for this, I suppose, although it's a very common change that's spreading over the whole United States. And then we have another change that's coming up from around the Great Lakes through Chicago, Milwaukee. And that particular change involves these particular sounds that we call a change shift. So for instance, bad can sound almost like bed. Hockey can sound like hacky. Bed can be like bad or bud, something like that. So I have some samples. I don't see if I can play these. Bring this back over. Try and get the mouse up there. There we go. Anyhow, the examples here are the one on the bad. Oh, there you go. Bad. I don't know if I can play it. The one on the left that would sound more like bed is a speaker from Janesville saying bad. That's not bed, it's bad that he was saying. But it sounds very much like bed. And so a lot of people don't really believe that these vowels are changing, so I just give those examples to show you. The second speaker was from near Milwaukee. Bad. Yeah, and then the first one? Bad. Right. So they're both saying the same word, and they're both from Wisconsin, but they're both producing them slightly different. And so this change is going on, and this is the change that's coming up from the south. Now what's very interesting is that we tend to think of the vowels in the mouth. The vowels are changing all at the same time, so they're doing a dance. But when they get to Wisconsin, this particular change is fairly strong. And Erica in Eau Claire is noticing that speakers are doing this as well. At the same time, there's another change that's going on where a change that's sweeping sort of from the west, coming around over the north central region on the map of the United States. And you can see this, this region up at the top by Minnesota. Actually, I don't know, Chris, are you playing those sounds? If you can get the mouse up there. Go ahead.
Caught. Caught.
Do they sound like the same word? This is from a Minnesotan, someone who lives right outside of Minneapolis. And now the next two. Oh,
Caught. Caught.
so this is a speaker from Presque Isle, and you can tell that they're different. So this is caught and caught. Like many, in fact, most Wisconsinites historically have been people who have said caught and caught, like caught being the thing that you sleep on, caught is the past tense of to catch a ball. Right? And those vowels are different. But you can tell from the Minnesotan that those are very similar vowels for that speaker. And what's happening is that that change is sweeping from Minnesota over into Wisconsin. And a number of speakers, even down near Milwaukee, are producing this type of sound. In fact, my daughter was helping me one day with this type of study and saw the word C-A-U-G-H-T. And I said, she was supposed to read off the word and then some numbers, and she said caught, and then gave me the numbers. Actually, sorry, she said caught, and then gave me the numbers, and then she came to C-O-T, and she said, oh, here's another caught. And she's knew enough to read them and said oh, the other one, because she knew they were spelled differently, but she pronounced them the same way. And she was also very aware at only age 7 that they were actually, that there was that difference, but that they were pronounced the same. And so that's coming into our area. And so what we're trying to do right now, one of the things we're studying is trying to study how those two changes are coming together. Because what's going to happen over time is that if you think about your own vowels, the vowels that you use, your grandchildren, so on and so forth, over time, the people coming that residents in the United States are going to change, into our state, are going to be changing the way that they produce vowels. And so you'll have people saying caught and caught instead of caught and caught, and you'll have people saying bed and for bad. And those are changes that are happening right now. There's something else that's happening, and this is actually, we kind of think it's new to Wisconsin, but in a way it's not. There really are two sources of this particular sound. And so this one is actually very interesting, and I think many of you probably, if you've gone out of the state and you're one of the speakers who does this, people have immediately reacted if you ever use the word bag. So there's this story that a new arrival comes to Madison. They go to a store and they buy some bread and milk, and they're standing there in front of the cashier. And the cashier says, "Want a beg for that?" And the response is, "I got a beg? I just paid for it." Right? So this is that particular vowel. Actually, Chris, can you play those two sounds?
Bag. Bag.
Go ahead and play them again.
Bag. Bag.
And the first speaker is, again, that speaker from Fox Point, I believe it is, just north of Milwaukee. And she's got, it's a diphthong. So that vowel, which isn't, in English we normally have like oi and ow and I. These are traditional things we call diphthongs, meaning that the tongue is moving while we're saying it. And what's happening is with this vowel in Wisconsin is that we're getting some kind of diphthongization movement. And you can hear that in the first speaker where she says, like bad. The way I say bad from upstate New York, it's very similar to that. And the second speaker is from Fond du Lac. Can you play that again, Chris?
Bag.
Right. And so that's close. Right. And so the first one is much closer to this kind of beg example. She shortens the vowel, and over time, for an outsider, many of us have had this experience where we hear that word, and it's, wow, that wasn't quite what I expected. And I think if you go outside of the state and you start using words like this, in fact, I had a student just recently tell me that she had she did an internship in Ohio. I thought, I'm in Ohio, Wisconsin, you're all in the Midwest. And they just constantly couldn't tell what she was saying because they were just so focused on her dialect. The fact that she was saying things like beg, so on, that they couldn't really focus on what she was saying. And that's typical of a lot of people when you go to another part of the country. So the vowel is changing a lot before G sounds, and this seems to be very typical of Upper Midwestern. It seems to be a nice Upper Midwestern sign that we're Upper Midwesterners. It happens in Minneapolis and actually in Minnesota as well. It's been around in Minnesota for a long time. All right. What also happens, and one of the things, again, that makes us believe that people are really thinking about these things in the background, is that what happens with a number of these words is that you'll find the people who say something like beg for bag are also people who will do the reverse for something like, for bagel, you get something like bagel and sagway. And so what does it tell us about something that's happening? It tells us that it's a very important sound. And what we believe from other studies around the country is that when these types of sounds get reversed like this, it means that there really is something going on in the speaker's brain about how they produce the sounds. And so what they're doing is they're saying, oh, I should have produced that sound, but I didn't. So they reverse it when they shouldn't reverse it. And for instance, like if you've heard America, for people who drop the R's, they might insert R's as well. And the same thing happens here where the vowels get flopped around in different environments, different settings. So it shows that they're aware of this and that there's some kind of correction going on. So again, one of the things that we're trying to just think about with the sounds, one of the things that we're trying to look at with the sounds is what do those sounds mean to a Wisconsinite? What do they mean in terms of identity as a Wisconsinite? What do they mean to outsiders when they hear those things? Now there's a whole series of sounds that I haven't even talked about, for instance, about other newer immigrant groups, about say Spanish English and Hispanics, when they come in and Spanish starts mixing with Wisconsin English, what's going on there. Also African American English. One project that we're working on right now is to look at African American English over the whole United States and look at how, since it's been a number of years since the Great Migration north, whether or not vowels are starting to change or consonants starting to change. And so what I found in the number of recordings that I've looked at is that speakers are being identified as African American, say around Milwaukee area, but at the same time they're identifying as a Wisconsinite. And so the beautiful thing about language is we can balance these identities. I can balance being, having German heritage, but I can also balance being from a certain part of the state. Or I can balance being from the southwest corner near Platteville, and so I'm going to produce my vowels different than people in Madison and Milwaukee. And part of that has to do with our identity, and who we want to identify with, how we want to identify. So that's really what's going on in Wisconsin with the sounds. We're really in the middle of that sort of middle period, so it's a very exciting time in terms of what's going on. All right, up next is Eric Raimy. He's going to talk about the grammar in Wisconsin.
Thank you, Tom. I'm the newest member of this group here, so they've given me a little bit of a shorter section here. And now, one of the things you want to, we really would like you to see here is that when we say grammar, this is not the scary class that you had in grade school, or at least I had with scary teachers rattling your knuckles and things like that, of speak this way, not that way. But it's more of the actual patterns of how Wisconsinites actually speak. And one of the things that I felt very blessed about is that since I've just moved here in the last year, I get to see all of these new patterns, all right? And so many of the things that we talk about here may not be that obvious to you because you use them or see them or know people who use them all the time. But when I come here, if we look at like this particular example from the Berrymans again, it takes me a little while to figure out what you all mean when you say, oh yeah, hey, get me a beer once, okay? As long as you're up here yet, all right? This is, I mean, I know how to budge and I know back budge, but a lot of these terms, you may not realize just like how rich in local Wisconsin tradition that they are and what they actually indicate. All right. So many of the things I'm going to say are actually repetitions of things that Luanne and Tom said, and some things that Erica are going to say. But now, instead of looking at particular sounds, we're going to look at actual particular words and where we can place words like that. Okay. So here is another pattern that appears to be rather unique to Wisconsin. And by understanding Wisconsin's history and rich immigrant heritage, we get an idea as to why Wisconsin has this particular pattern, as opposed to other places in the United States who don't have this pattern, okay? So, as we can say, come over here once in Wisconsin English, all right? Well, one of the things we want to recognize is that once, if we translate this into some other languages, we have the same pattern here of mal, all right? So if we look at German and we do just a literal word-by-word translation of how you would say come here in German, you get the translation of come here once, all right? Now, once we understand the immigrant history of Wisconsin, we get a better understanding as to why this, like some of these features are still around, all right? And that when someone first immigrates to the United States and they don't speak English, they usually have a difficult time for this because it's difficult to learn a language when you're an adult, all right? And so it's very natural for people to originally speak a second language as a very close to kind of a word-by-word translation of their native language, all right? Now, when these people have children, though, the children learn English from them, all right? And now the beautiful thing about children is that they're just little language learning machines, okay? As long as you take care of them, love them, and speak to them, or just around them, they will learn the language that they're exposed to, all right? But the other beautiful thing about children is that they're also very naive, all right? They have no idea that there's anything special about, say, a sentence like, come here once, or we have time yet, all right? Because this is who they are seeing speaking English, and these are the people that they're learning English from, okay? So when we understand that there's going to be these influences from the languages that the immigrants brought to Wisconsin, so as we talked about, German is a very large influence, Polish, the Scandinavian languages, we can understand why people who are not familiar with Wisconsin may come here and think, like, why do Wisconsinites use these strange patterns of words, okay? Well, because it indicates a rich heritage of immigration. So the thing here is also something that Tom also mentioned here, is that if we look at general American, so kind of something that I grew up hearing, I would say something like he's coming along, or even just he's coming, okay? In Wisconsin English, you may hear something like he's coming with, or are you coming with, okay? That was very strange to me when I first heard this, okay? But when we begin to look at some other languages that we know there were strong immigration patterns into Wisconsin, and we translate it literally kind of word for word from German, you have a come with. So, you know, translate word for word. Also, from Dutch, and also from Danish. All right? So just as Tom said, is that if you have a group of children all getting exposed to these patterns of, you know, coming along or coming with, that we can understand that the German immigration will influence this, the Dutch immigration will influence this, the Danish immigrants will influence this. We get this kind of perfect storm of immigration to support and create these new features of English that we can now identify as Wisconsin English here. Okay, and so then even the other like large immigrant groups, the Frisians, the Norwegians, the Swedish, and the Yiddish, all help to further support this, these unique aspects of Wisconsin English. Okay, and so here, since I was the new person, I was given a short little section here, so now I'd like to turn it over to Erica.
Right, so thank you, Eric. Oops. Did the wrong thing. Okay. So I'm going to talk about a different kind of example, an example of something that didn't originate in Wisconsin, but is here and is coming here perhaps in even greater numbers. Now, this sentence may not sound strange to you. Gas isn't cheap anymore. And in fact, probably most of us believe it's true, right? How about this sentence? Gas is expensive anymore. How many of you like this one? No one? This is what we call positive anymore. Notice that you can use anymore when there's a negative word like not in the sentence. In the first one you said that's fine. So if there's a negative word like not, you have no problem with anymore. The dialect area that I come from, we also will use anymore in sentences where we don't have a not. So gas is expensive anymore is just fine. We can also say anymore, gas is expensive. You'll notice here that anymore has a slightly different meaning than it does in the first sentence. Gas isn't cheap anymore. The anymore means what? So any longer? No more? Presently gives us an idea of also what it means in the second and third sentences. Gas is expensive anymore. Presently, nowadays, these days are translations for the positive anymore. Positive anymore is something that we find in the Midland dialect area among the group of people that we call the Scotch Irish originally. We find this in Irish today, still Irish English. It came along with these immigrants who settled primarily in western Pennsylvania, went through Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, spread out westward as well. And we have a thick band of positive anymore speakers through this central part of the United States. We do have some positive anymore speakers in Wisconsin, in southern Wisconsin, and we also have scattered positive anymore speakers in other parts of Wisconsin. This is a feature, as Tom talked about, that there are some sound changes that are happening. This is a feature that's also on the move, that's coming from the Midland dialect area, and it's moving northward into Wisconsin as well as other areas. And there are some other features that you might be on the lookout for as well. This is just one of many. So I'm bringing you the outsider influence into Wisconsin English today as one example. And now I'm going to switch gears and talk about perceptions of Wisconsin English. Now, most of the time when we think about dialects, we think they're things that other people speak, right? We don't speak a dialect. The way we speak is normal. That's how everyone speaks. It's just fine. And that's true for our region for the most part. The way we speak is normal because that's how everyone around us speaks. But we also like to look at what are some of the perceptions that we have. We know that we all speak dialects, and so what are some of the perceptions we have about those? And perceptions can be interesting not only from a comedic standpoint. If we look at what Jeff Foxworthy has to say about Wisconsin English, for instance, we have, if you have ever refused to buy something because it's too spendy, you might live in Wisconsin. Now, how many people here use spendy? But just a couple, and I see a lot of head shaking, and you're right, your head should be shaking because this is not a characterization of Wisconsin English. In fact, it's something that we see primarily, and Luanne can correct me here if I'm wrong, primarily in the Northwest, in Washington and Oregon, and even as far east as Minnesota. But this is not something, spendy is not something that we see yet in Wisconsin English. So sometimes perceptions from outsiders especially can be wrong, but they can sometimes also be a little off the mark when they're from insiders. Here's another one from Jeff Foxworthy. So if you know how to say Oconomowoc, Waukesha, Menominee, and Manitowoc, you might live in Wisconsin. And as you can tell, I now live in Wisconsin, and I'm able to pronounce those most of the time. Although you can probably tell that I'm also not originally from Wisconsin. So let's look at an insider's perspective here on Wisconsin English. This is from an email. You know you're a true Wisconsinite when you can identify a southern or eastern accent. Again, we have another pronunciation one here. I'll read it for you. You have no problem pronouncing Lac de Flambeau. And the last one that you cannot see because it's on the floor is a brat is something you eat. B-R-A-T, of course. Seeing the spelling gives us something different. Here we see some other insider perspectives. I've been doing some work on perceptions of Wisconsin English within the state. And these are some of the things that people from Eau Claire think about northern Wisconsin speech. And one of the characteristics that comes out is, many of the characteristics have to do with pronunciation. And this first one illustrates something that we refer to as Canadian raising. He says, my cousins say we speak Minnesotan, where we hold the O out longer, out and about and about. And this is something that we do here in parts of northern Wisconsin, as well as northern Minnesota and in parts of Canada. So there is something on the mark there. We have another example of we always talk how we're going to go make fence or go drive truck. There's a lot of I-seeners that come from Greenwood, Augusta, other places too. This person just thought of those two areas. They say use guys in Greenwood. I know I've heard that. They say use guys a lot of places too in Wisconsin. In this last one, we're starting to see some perceptions, some understanding of some of the sound changes that Tom talked about. So I was in Green Bay in the summer, and it seemed like closer to Illinois sounding. You remember Tom talked about the northern cities vowel shift, this change in the pronunciation of several vowels. That is something that is well established in northern Illinois, especially in Chicago. And here there's someone who's already picking up on that change and is noticing it. If we turn to the other side of the state, or another side of the state, I should say, the southern Wisconsin perceptions from people in Eau Claire, we see more of the picking up on the northern city shift. So you have in Madison, you're in the southern part of the state, not too far away from Illinois. So down there, you're going to get a bit more of a coagulation. And we weren't sure what a coagulation was, but what we think they're realizing is that they're actually hearing some of the northern city shift changes. They're hearing something that doesn't sound, to a person from Eau Claire in the west central part of the state, it doesn't sound like it's from that area. It sounds like it's something from Illinois. And again, that reminds us of that vowel change that's happening. Now, Milwaukee, again, is much further south, and again, with the whole vowels, they're probably closer to the Illinois section of the dialect. So like I said, we're seeing perceptions here already noticing some of those vowel changes. Maybe not exactly what they are, but picking up on them. Now we have some other perceptions about how people in Milwaukee talk, and they have a different way their words come out, how quickly they say them, kind of like how gangsters talk. Okay? Not sure what to make of that one, but something to think about. And then the final one that, again, you can only see part of that there. In Milwaukee, they say really weird words, bubbler, soda, catty corner, all those really strange things that only people in Milwaukee would say. Now, one of the things I find interesting about some of these perceptions from people in Eau Claire is how they're distinguishing different areas of Wisconsin and even setting themselves apart. So a person from Eau Claire does not want to be recognized as sounding like they're from the southeastern part of the state, at least from Milwaukee. And that could, I mean, they've got some kind of negative perceptions. They're saying that's what people do down there. And so this may shed some light on how the changes with the northern city shift and the low back vowel merger, the cot merger, the two examples that Tom talked about, or even some of the grammatical changes, how these might play out. Because if someone in Eau Claire thinks that the way that people in Minnesota talk sounds okay, then they may be just fine with some of the changes, the cot merger that's coming in from the west. Whereas if they think that people in the southern part of the state sound kind of strange, they may want to keep that distance and not accept some of the changes that are coming from the south. So in looking at perceptions, we can not only get a little bit of comic relief in seeing what people think about others in the state, but we can also shed some light on some of the future directions of Wisconsin English. And so with that, I will wrap up and say thank you. And also remind you that you have some questionnaires that have been passed out, and we'd like you, if at all possible, to take some time to fill those out and turn them in for us. I'd also like to open the floor for questions, because as Tom said, we want to dialogue with you. We want to hear what you think. We want to try to answer your questions if we can. And so we're going to open things up for questions. Okay, and there is a microphone that will come around, so if you could just wait till that comes to you. Then we'll be able to hear everyone. Here it comes. Okay. And I'm going to sit down so we can take questions as a panel.
I have a question for Luanne. My late mother-in-law, when she was working on her doctorate in linguistics from Brown back in the early 30s, was mapping the upper Hudson River as a part of a regional dialect and dictionary. And I was wondering if any of that work has been saved, or if any of that was part of a project that was being done back then into this current dictionary, because they were trying to look at that time before the influence of radio that they thought was going to homogenize American English, and we're trying to map, and she was going out with pictures of different things, and what do you call this? Is it a wiggler, is it an angleworm, or whatever?
Or a
And I
nightcrawler.
was just wondering how that fed into what the work you're doing.
I would guess that she was probably working on the American Linguistic Atlas project. They published the Linguistic Atlas of New England called Lane in the, I think it was 37, 39.
Mm-hmm.
And Kurath and McDavid worked on and published pronunciation in the eastern states. And yes, we do take that into we work with that for our dictionary, and we do have citations from those works. So yes, it's very definitely in our work. It was great work. Too bad they didn't do the whole country at one time. The Linguistic Atlas of the Upper Midwest, which doesn't go further east than Minnesota, was published in the 1970s, I think 1974. So you can't compare the different sections of the country, which you can do with our work, because we did the whole country within 5 years. But it wasn't as detailed as that.
Going back to the original thing about the bubbler, there is a Milwaukeeanism verse. I'm never very thirsty when I'm at the sink, but when I see a bubbler, I always have to drink.
That's great.
But
That's nice. I haven't heard that one.
when my husband and I were first married, and this has been an ongoing joke, I asked him to get the big black spider out of the oven. And he went and he looked and he came back and there's no spider in the oven. And I went and I got a big black cast iron frying pan out of the oven.
Right.
And I said, it would bite you. And he said, that's what I was worried about. But in my home, the silver ones were frying pans. The black ones were spiders. And
Oh,
it
really?
goes back to colonial days when black pots with trivet legs were
Right.
stuck in the fireplace.
Right. They had
But
legs.
that was more of what I have to admit, I was expecting was to hear more about these dialects and idioms.
Well, I could talk to you about Booyah and Lefse and so and more things like that. But one of the things we want to show is that language change is ongoing, and even though we might be losing some words, we're gaining other ones, and we're gaining new regional terms as well. Yeah. Where did you grow up?
Till I was a freshman in high school in Milwaukee,
Uh-huh.
and then far north in Wisconsin.
One of the things that you mentioned there is another way that language can change. You made a distinction between spider being the black one with the legs and frying pan being the other one. A lot of times when we have synonyms, we try to make a difference between them, one having one meaning and one the other, so that we develop different senses for the same for words.
Thank you. First, a correction. It's fix fence, not make fence. I don't know where the hell those people are from.
Don't the Finnish people say make fence? I
Okay.
think the Finns.
No, it's. Oh, we do.
And-
fi-
and-
we do
and
fix
where's your
fence.
family from?
We're fixing fence.
What kind of ethnicity background? Polish, okay.
Okay. Now the question: what is a hinder?
A hinder, well, hinder can be a couple of different things. Where do you want to go? It can be a rear end, right?
Huh?
He's going to look it up what we've got in the dictionary. But what I thought you were going to say is hiney. A heine is also,
Hinder.
I know, a heine is also rear end. That's what my mother used in Kansas when I was growing up. But heine, in the sense of a certain type of haircut, is we found only in Wisconsin. It was basically a term used around the World War time, and maybe it was from soldiers' haircuts, short haircuts. But we've only found that in Wisconsin. For the short haircut? Uh-huh. Hinder.
Hinder.
I mean, I wrote part of these entries, and I've read them all, but I don't remember them all.
Well, there are actually multiple entries here. One of them is situated. I'm sorry. Yes, we apparently have multiple ones here. We have one meaning for old-fashioned, one meaning for the buttocks, one meaning for situated last or in the rear, hind. We also have one which is a verb meaning a hindrance, and that's it. Would you like to add one?
No, it means buttocks. That's what it means.
You know, when I travel about out of state, it seems that people will identify me as a Wisconsinite because of my speech. And I don't understand how they can do that, because I know I sound exactly like George Stephanopoulos and a lot of the TV bigwigs. So again, explain
He probably
that.
doesn't travel about. I spent a year in Germany, and there were a few Americans around. One was from Pennsylvania, one was from New Jersey, one was from New York. I forget where the others were from. And for the first, 9 months we were there, we did nothing but speak German with each other. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, we started talking English. And I was just amazed at the accents. And I had always maintained that I didn't have an accent because, everybody talks like people from Kansas. Well, they started making fun of me for my Washington and things like this. And so I started changing my language. I'll have to honestly say I started changing my language. It was before I was studying linguistics and knew that I really like regional variation. But try going to some other part and meeting up with, 3 or 4 people from different states, and you'll find all of you speak differently. And it's great. I think it's fantastic. Brett was saying he was trying to get rid of his fixin' to, what's that? Needs fixed.
Don't
The
get rid of
car
that.
needs fixed and things like that, because he says people don't understand him here. That's an Appalachian thing, and I think he should keep it. He's got to keep it. I love these things.
I'm wondering, have you heard side by each?
Yes.
You
This
have
is
side
all
by
four.
each. My husband's family are all loggers, and when you stack wood, the wood has to be laid side by each. Or the deer are standing in the woods side by each.
Mhm.
And just wondering if you had that one, because it was so, I'm from Milwaukee, and that was one of the weirder things I heard from his family up north there. Hey.
The one that always goes along with it is trod a cow to fence some hay once yet.
Right. Well, that's my mother came from a German background, but my father didn't, and that was one of the phrases he would use to show that he could speak German. Eric's going to read you what it says here about side by each.
It is the first entry on page 951 of volume 4, and it says that it means side by side.
Give it to Rita.
And it is
It's
South Midlands.
scattered but less frequently used in the South and South Midlands, so it's more northern and western side by each. But it is wider than Wisconsin.
I have a question about the word ja, which we, of course, with all the Germans in Wisconsin, accept. How acceptable is that in other regions of the country? Ja for yes. Is it widespread?
I think that's quite widespread, yeah.
It's okay.
It's not, I think it goes beyond German. It's in Scandinavian languages, Dutch, and other languages like that. So there's a large number of people who would use something like
Because I
that.
met someone, of course, now people travel so much and relocate, but I met someone from the Southwest who thought it was very strange when she heard that word up in Wisconsin.
But I think a lot of kids use yeah, which I would spell Y-E-A-H, but it's very close to that, so yeah.
Sort of a funny story and gives me a chance to sneer at Minnesotans. Guy wrote a paper for me once, and it was a good paper, and I was reading it, and I called the guy in to talk with me, and I said, you know, Doug, this word "usta," U-S-T-A, I've got really bad news for you. There is no such word. It's two words used to. And he had the funniest blank look on his face. He says, that's what we say in Minnesota. I had that in my master's thesis all over the place. Nobody corrected it. And I said, well, in Wisconsin it's used too. And he changed, but he wasn't happy about it.
And his major professor actually let him leave that in his master's thesis?
Apparently.
He's probably from Minnesota as well.
I had a real reality when I went into service at the age of 18, coming here from Marathon County. I think I was the only Yankee in the group, if I would call it that. And after we were together for a couple days, they gave me a nickname. And it was Once Yet. I didn't realize how, I'm Pomeranian German, and didn't realize the influence on my speech until I was the only one talking like this.
Yeah. I have to tell you a funny story from our family. My husband is German. I mean, he's really German. He came over in the early 60s as a student, and it just stayed. And I have two children. When they were about 7 and 9, one of their friends made the comment about, your dad has such a cute accent, and both of them immediately turned on her and said, my dad doesn't have an accent. They've become so used to it, they couldn't even tell that he has a heavy German accent. I mean, people used to ask him when he first came over to say things like Rural Route 3 and Crispy Critters because it sounded so funny.
I too grew up in this area and left and went to school in Eau Claire. And just going from this area to Eau Claire, students would laugh at the things I would say. And so I became very conscious of my German ancestry. I also took 2 years of German in high school, and that helped me understand. But I left Wisconsin and went to California for a year. And you didn't have to open your mouth more than a minute, and people would say, you're from Wisconsin. I'd look at myself and think, well, how do they know? And came back to Wisconsin. I spent most of my life over in Appleton and Shawano area where I taught elementary school, and I'd come back home and spend time with the relatives, and I'd go back on Monday and I'd catch myself saying things about my hairs, and I'd have to really think about what I was saying because you slip back into that your old dialect very quickly. And when you're gone for a while, and I come home and I think, oh yeah, they say this here.
That's very true.
One other question. Do you think any of the change in the dialect and our vowels is related to the lack of teaching grammar in schools like we did longer ago? More recently, things are a lot more lax language-wise.
No, probably not. In fact, one of the things about that particular change that's happening with the vowels is that they occur in urban areas rather than rural areas. And one of the things that we see, people have different theories about why it's happening, but it often is something that's led actually by females in terms of the change. So females are changing before males, and they often are very progressive in this type of change in very certain settings. So when they were among friends, the studies have found that women in those settings tend to be very innovative in their vowels. When they get home, they're very conservative. So that's sort of the stereotype, but actually people have found examples of this. And a lot of that has to do with sort of where we think language is going and sort of an undercurrent of it. And what happens is that innovation is picked up by the children, and then they innovate further. And so then you have this cycle of innovation going on. So it's not really bad English. In fact, what it is really good communication skills and networking. So the people with more networks are actually more likely to change their speech in a certain way depending on different environments. So they've gotten really good at networking. And so actually it's really good evidence that it's the opposite of feeling like, oh, maybe the people who don't have education, they're not changing. But in fact, the people who are out there talking to other people, who are networking, they're the people who are actually really innovating. And the people who don't have those tend not to innovate as much.
I have a question about putting the R in the middle of a word after a vowel. I've heard it like warsh, W-A-R-S-H.
Right.
And I just don't understand it.
It's called an intrusive R, and I grew up with it. I talked about Washington, and I washed my clothes, but I decided I didn't want to do it anymore, so I quit. But there are large parts of the country which do that.
It's something that, what it reveals, like I was trying to say earlier, that it reveals actually that people are aware of the R. So in other words, they've, perhaps say in Boston, they've been teased enough about Harvard Yard, and that they're very aware of that sound. And so then what happens is then they try to overcorrect themselves. Somebody once corrected me on my speech right before I went for a job interview in Michigan one year about how I was using the past tense, and I couldn't pick up on what they were saying. And that's actually not the important part. The important part of the story is that when I got there, I tried very hard not to use the past tense through the whole weekend. And that was really, really difficult. But I was so aware of the comment somebody had made that I was very nervous that here I am among other linguists and I'm just going to blow it because some of my past tense is wrong.
Do you, do you think that the way a dialect or a regional speech develops is primarily from the ethnic origin, or is it possible that a manner of speaking can evolve just because of the environment or something in that community? Yeah. And I am thinking of if you listen to people speak between Manitowoc and Kewaunee and Green Bay, if I hear somebody speak, I can pinpoint them to that part of the state quickly, just like she was mentioning before about the Eau Claire people. You can identify different parts of the state. And is that developed just there, or is that primarily from the ethnic background?
I think the thing that you were experiencing about being able to pinpoint somebody often comes from your own exposure and your own experience to hearing those things. So for instance, if you were to hear Southerners, as often the case, many Northerners, when they go to the South, they start using the y'all, but they'll start using it in the incorrect way because they're not sensitive to how it's actually used correctly. But a Southerner would never use it that way. So part of it is exposure, that you're very sensitive to the stretch of landscape and the dialects that go on. Whereas somebody else from outside, like myself, who didn't grow up around this area, I wouldn't have no idea. And I've not been exposed in terms of the real fine tune of the locations. And I know the area that you're talking about is actually a very short, relatively short distance. The second thing is that a lot of those things, that the way that languages change often happens in multiple ways. And it's very difficult to talk about language change only in one method. So for instance, I was talking before about how sounds will innovate from, say, the middle class women getting together and playing bridge. At the same time, we know that some words come into language from the top down, so from academics down, but a lot of words come from the bottom up, from farming and things like that, and they come up in a lot of our own words that we're used to. So there's a lot of different mechanisms of change, and a lot of it has to do with the things that you're exposed to that you pick up right away in terms of their speech.
Could you quickly translate this list? Beeler, chocolate dip, sweet soup, fall downstairs.
Okay, if you promise not to. If you promise not to write in the answers that you hear us say now. Julie Pleer and I gave 2 talks I just wanted to add something to this, in Sturgeon Bay and Sister Bay in Door County. And as you know, there's a lot of Belgian background people around, well, actually partly in Brown County, but around Green Bay and going halfway up through Sturgeon Bay. Well, when we gave the talk in Sister Bay, and we had a bunch of Belgian terms in our talk, those people weren't interested at all. And I never realized there was that much difference within Door County. The people in Sturgeon Bay, of course, were very interested, but the Sister Bay, forget it. We just kind of, oh, well, they're tuning out here, we'll skip over these. Beeler is one of the terms up around Oconto and Green Bay. It means something like, it can be a mischievous child. One person said the example of, that Beeler was drunk and he pissed on the porch. This type of a person, okay? But as far as we know, it's only up around Brown County, somewhat into Door County, the lower part of Door County, and we're trying to determine the spread of this term. Chocolate dip is also from that area. Julie is from that area, which is one of the reasons we came up with some of these. Chocolate dip is a nighttime skinny dip. And it doesn't seem to be very widespread. We didn't pick these things up in our dictionary because the network of, we had 20-some informants for the whole of the state of Wisconsin. Well, we didn't ask any questions about skinny dipping at night either. But so we don't really have all of these terms, and I do think that we have a lot of regional terms within smaller regions in Wisconsin, and this is what we're trying to determine in part. I don't have a copy of that. Could you? Sharky. How many of you know Sharky? Students. Any students here? You know Sharky? When you put your hair up in a ponytail and there's a thing sticking up like this? That's a Sharky. And so far, most of the people we have determined who know this are from southeastern Wisconsin, and they're young. They're college age or mid-20s, and that's it. Sweet soup. Anyone know sweet soup? What's your definition? Fruit soup. Fruit soup. Fall downstairs. Fall downstairs is one we do have in the dictionary. It was picked up by Professor Cassidy when he did his Wells survey, which is Wisconsin English Language Survey, in 1949 and 50. And it's straight from the German. This one took us a long time to figure out. It's straight from the German, die Treppe herunterfallen, which means to fall downstairs, and it means to have a really rough, uneven haircut. So you looked like you fell downstairs, or did you fall downstairs last night? Kuyo. You guys are all in the wrong area to know this Kuyo. This is a Belgian card game. Can you guess what language that is? Finnish. It's Finnish. It's a fish stew, and it's used in the UP. And next week, Julie and I are going up to Superior and Ashland, and we're going to see if they use it up there, the Finns that live there. Sisu? Anybody know that? Anybody know the German Gemütlichkeit? Okay, this is a type of thing like that. It's very hard to translate, but this means something like guts or courage, and it's used quite frequently in people who know anything about the Finnish language. Tree. To go tree? Nobody? Yeah? No, it means actually to go up from house to house and look at the Christmas trees that people have up. Again, that, as far as we know, is more common in eastern Wisconsin. We don't have a lot of evidence on it yet. So see, we're trying to find out how widespread these terms are and how many people actually know them.
You should have duck soup. I think that's something we know about.
Duck soup? We have duck blood soup in the dictionary.
I mean, duck soup is, if you're in trouble or... You're in duck soup, you're in deep doo-doo.
Is that from around here?
Yeah, duck soup, yeah.
Well, see, that one I don't know. Is it in there?
I'm checking.
We're checking to see if we have it and I've forgotten.
Duck soup means everything's fine to Italian immigrants living
Really? But here it means you're in deep doo-doo. Is that right? Yeah. In Marathon County? Or in Wausau? Stevens Point too? Portage County, central Wisconsin, okay.
If you use the one, I'm gonna take a stab at it. Kalamazoo. Yeah, that's the finished one.
Do you have it?
We do, but it's
Yes, we did that one.
We do have duck soup, but it's an easy task, something or someone easy to handle.
Keep them in the region.
Well, we have points in. You know how to translate this.
This is, we have it down as widespread, but less frequently used in the South Midland, which is like Appalachian area, lower Pennsylvania, West Virginia, this area. But it's used elsewhere.
How about a piece of cake?
That, I think, is fairly common. It's a piece of cake. I think that'd be used everywhere.
I was wondering if this was part of the Northern Cities vowel shift or if it was more localized. Wisconsinites, I've noticed, say milk instead of milk, which I barely got through college saying.
That's actually a wider spread. I don't know, Erica, if you want to talk about that.
Well, it is something that we find in areas in the upper Midwest where before L, some people, in most of the United States, it'll be pronounced with an I, but in certain areas of the upper Midwest, in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan especially, it'll be pronounced as an S. So you get not only milk, but pillow as well. So you get the Illinois. So upper Midwestern.
I'd like to let everyone know we have pencils here. If you don't have a writing implement to fill out the multitude of surveys we've given you. Also, we'll take one more question here in the theater and then invite you over to the terrace room to follow through and ask our panelists individually your questions. So one more question.
What do you call this habit, is it sloppiness or of dropping G's? It seems like even politicians who are very well educated do this to appear folksy, like going and coming, and it's nice to be in here.
There's actually a lot of evidence that people have studied this particular sound, where the ng turns to n, particularly with the running, catching, things like that. And it's actually been studied not only here in the United States, but also in England quite a bit. And there's often, where else? Australia as well. Australia, England, and America, people have studied it quite a bit, and it's often associated with class, also with ethnicity, and certain types of cuts of social groups. And so it is a social marker in terms of how it's used. So there is a lot of evidence of that. A lot of people have studied.
But I think a lot of that, I mean, I myself use both forms. I know I do. It depends on what kind of code. There's something called code switching, where you can talk more informally or more formally, depending on the situation that's called for. And I think in our more informal code, we tend to say things like, I'm running late, and things like that.
And so actually for the politicians, the goal would be to show that they are inclusive with the group that you're in, so you're going to sound more informal. So then you're going to use the N type of form rather than the G. Yeah. So it's actually a technique a lot of politicians can use, is changing their speech that way.
I noticed one of our Wisconsin politicians, when he moved down to Washington, did take speech classes, though, and now he does use the G's at the end of his INGs.
So if any of you know of more terms that you think might be unique to, I mean, we gave a talk in Beaver Dam, and one guy said, well, you're not going to find any interesting words here. We all talk normal. But if you can think of any terms that you think might be unique, like this one that you just gave us, the duck soup, please do let us know.
Well, once again, there is a reception after this over at the terrace room, and invite you to join us there. But I just wanted, I thought we should give them all a round of applause and thank them for coming this evening.